Hey friends, it's Jamie. I'm here to talk about the Dark Moon in Gemini, which is happening right now, actually. It is the 14th, and they will be conjunct later today. You can see from mine at 11 o'clock tonight. For some of you, it will be tomorrow, the 15th. Um, and let's see, every time I do this, like this is where I kind of like stop. Like, what are we talking about? We're talking about the Dark Moon. Dark moon energy is really important because that is when the moon has no illumination. That is when the sun and the moon are together. I always say it's when we're with ourselves, our most beloved. It's that masculine and feminine energy coming together. Um, it is this time of integration. It is this time of alignment. It's a good time for meditations. It's a great time to rest, especially for men or women, but I usually say women because a lot of times women are extremely busy running households, running families, running jobs, all those sorts of things. So, dark moon energy is extremely potent. It is the void. It is where creation happens. And we could also say magic. So, in this video, we're going to talk about the energies that are happening now, and the energies that I see like moving forward as we move towards the summer solstice, and ways that we can work with these energies in order to keep things moving along because there's so much energy coming on the planet right now, and it can be very overwhelming, a lot of times. And we've got solar flares going on, we do have earthquakes happening. So lots of energy we've got as above, both as above, so below with these earthquakes and with these solar flares, right? And so we'll talk about this as we get ready to move into Cancer season. So right now I'm going to move this way so we can look at the chart. Um, Everyone's favorite, not really, but everyone's kind of being facetious there. So right here, you can see the sun and the moon are exact conjunct 24 degrees of Gemini. They're right there at that point of that king and queen energy, right? Well, they're in it. The last 20, say 20 to 30 degrees to me is the king and queen, king and queen energy. So it is this mature energy of the energies of Gemini. Gemini is the twins, Gemini, Castor and Pollux. They do represent duality. When I used to talk about them in 2019 or so, I'd always say, okay, we're moving out of this idea of duality. And I think too, now that I've been doing it a lot this long, it is this idea maybe of maybe not moving out of duality, but understanding the energy of duality, that one isn't better than the other. We do have night and day. Right now we do have left and right. We do have up and down. In working with this to see how, and understanding, and understanding light and dark, understanding um, the way we view time here on 3D space, right? In 3D space. But really getting out of that idea that one's better than the other, female, male, the way that we work with those and the way that as we move forward, we understand, gender is a construct and things like that. So the sun and the moon being in Gemini doesn't necessarily deal with duality, um, but it does deal with the understanding of two, right? Or Castor and Pollux. Um, and being in these degrees of mastery, the sun and the moon are feminine and masculine coming together to have this conversation. And it is important to see how we are communicating with ourselves. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Gemini is all about communication. It is about asking questions. It is about how we speak. It is about how we communicate, the way that we communicate with our emotions, with our body language. But it's also about the way we listen, right? What we're observing. Um, how is that affecting the way that we see the world, show up in the world? And this is coming in hot and heavy, you guys, with like AI and how things are being manipulated. What are we paying attention to? Um, And again, you could put this in the forms of duality, um, if you'd like, but we like speaking, listening, push, pull, I guess you could say too. Masculine, masculine, feminine, all those ideas, but moving into seeing how they work in right relationship with each other, the idea of being in alignment. It's not this idea of constantly fighting, you know, constantly trying to prove yourself, saying who's best, this way's better. It is this idea of love that keeps coming back in moving out of this constant fight, constant fighting. What's interesting is that you'll see that the sun and the moon are in a sesque square with Juno, who's right here at 10 degrees. They're opposite Lilith, who's over here in Sagittarius. Remember, Sagittarius, its highest vibes is live and let live. Um, and they're sextiling Eris, who is down here in Aries. And so all of these have to do with divine feminine energies. And it's really interesting when I was thinking about the idea of a sesque square with Juno. A sesque square is basically a square and a half. Okay, it's 135 degrees away from each other. So there is going to be some attention on this matter, I guess that you can say. And it is this idea about being in right relationship. Juno rules time. She's the goddess of all goddesses when it comes to the Romans. She was part of the Capitoline trio with Minerva, who was wisdom, and and Jupiter, who was her consort, right? And Jupiter was seen as the king of the gods. Um, and what's interesting about that when I was thinking is that, what do we have going on? But Venus, who is our divine feminine, who we see as our divine feminine, has been in this conjunction with Jupiter, right? In Cancer, which rules the home, right? And it's this, again, the sun and moon, masculine, feminine, in a conversation with Juno, because she was seen as an equal to Jupiter, right? How do we see relationships? Where do we see ourselves in time right now? What is happening at this time in our lives right now? How do we hold ourselves to our value and what we see ourselves as value? That goes back to Venus, who is now moved in Leo, and we'll do a video on that later. But working in this dark moon with the sun and the moon in Gemini, communication. What are we communicating to ourselves about how we see ourselves in right relationship? Do we see ourselves as Juno, um, queen of the goddesses, right? We know things. Do we see our partner as Jupiter, ruling with the same energy? Okay, but do we see that within ourselves? Do we understand that masculine energy within ourselves? And this would be the time to ask ourselves to get that into balance, into right relationship, into alignment. Lilith, right, who's now Black Moon Lilith, again, she left because she wasn't being seen as an equal. Again, right relationship with the self. And then Eris, our sweet, sweet Eris, she's down here, right? And Aries, Aries is that I am presence. Aries, cardinal fire, right? This is how we get started. This is that passion, that's this desire. Eris, she was discord, right? She threw that golden apple to who's the fairest, right? And it was that um basically an FU, right? To that lower feminine energy that came out of mythology, right? Like women are catty, women can't be friendly to each other, right? Who is the fairest? Let's see how this goes, right? But Eris is starting that discord with the sun and the moon to see where we are now, to see how we see ourselves now. Do you see yourself as the fairest? And if you do, that's great. How do you put it out there, right? How do you come from that place of being humble? How do you come from that place of understanding? We're all the fairest, right? It's not a fight. And that is also getting us out of that duality of Castor and Pollux. It's not a fight, right? There's more than enough. There's more than enough wisdom with Juno. She shared, it was her and Minerva, right? Minerva was wisdom. They weren't fighting over who was the smartest, and who was ruling time and any of those energies. It was that divine feminine energy of the whole, of the encompassed, um, of light and dark, right? In light and dark, it has feminine energy. Light and dark has masculine energy. It is about coming back into this right relationship with the self. As we move towards the summer solstice, as we move towards Cancer season, where Jupiter is still hanging out in Cancer. Mercury, who rules Gemini, is still in Cancer, right? So, how are we communicating to ourselves of this power that we have when we do become into right relationship, when we understand that masculine and feminine energy does need to be in balance with itself, right? Instead of living in this idea of these patriarchal norms that this is what masculine energy does and this is what feminine energy does. And the more that we move out of that, right, the more stark it becomes. That's why when you look on, you know, certain things on on the internet or Instagram, and people have quote unquote trad wife culture, or the male loneliness epidemic, like it starts to become a parody of itself because um when you're in right relationship with yourself, then you can be in right relationship with your partner, right? And then you do come into that idea of intimacy. You do come into that idea of sacred sexuality. You do come into that idea of creation. You understand the receiving in the giving, right? The moving, like the receiving and then moving it out, right? Castor and Pollux, the twins, Gemini, listening, talking. There has to be the balance of each one. And this dark time also, it's a supermoon. It didn't lead with that. It is a supermoon. So these energies are going to be um, even more prominent on Earth because that's just saying the moon's closest to us. We can't see it, but it's because it's in the dark moon right now. Um, but really bringing these questions to the void, bringing in, asking for answers from this, from the void. Um, the sun and the moon is also trining the North Node, who's in its final, where is North Node right here, who's in its final degrees. So it's in its degrees of mastery of Pisces, right? Um, the idea of faith, spirituality, but also the unconscious coming to the front, coming to the conscious. So maybe things that we didn't realize that we do that perpetuate stereotypes within ourselves, right? Maybe we weren't getting ahead because we thought, well, I'm a fill in the blank, so I can only do this, or I can't get ahead because, so and so thinks this about fill in the blank. We've got to see where we are hindering ourselves with the way that we talk to ourselves, the way we communicate ourselves. And we've got to see how it's time to go into that Juno energy, right? That Lilith energy. Bring in that discord within ourselves, right? To bring us back to goddess status, right? And goddess status is that idea of being in right relationship with the masculine energy. There's no there's no here or there, right? It just is, right? Divine masculine, divine feminine. Goddess energy encompasses life and death, right? Because that is creation. In order to have that creation, you have to have that masculine energy in there. So this is a really beautiful dark moon, a super dark super moon to bring this conversation back into the self, right? Before we start to move into Cancer season. So just remember the sun and the moon are together, right? This is the dark time. And then we'll move into the new moon energies. Um, but the sun will stay in Gemini, right? That the masculine, because the sun, the masculine, will stay there and keep moving these energies through, right? Moving this conversation, keep having that conversation, lighting it up in the self, even though the moon will move forward. So work with this dark energy, right? Because it's the dark time of the month. Work with this void, understand, sit with this meditation. How can I show up in better embodying the energies of Juno? How can I show up better embodying the energies of Lilith and understanding Lilith better? What is it, the discord that is inside of me that I need to work on in order to move myself forward, hitting on all cylinders with this masculine and feminine energy? Work with this. I love Gemini season. Now, I am a Gemini rising, so that could be it. But this is such a beautiful way to close out Gemini season with these energies, asking ourselves, because when the moon gets into her new moon status, and then the sun will move into Cancer, it is like that. It's still coming out of that quiet time, from this conversation we're having. And I always say like like when your best friend comes over and you guys sit on the couch for hours just talking about things, that's that dark moon energy. Or like I said, your partner comes over and you guys talk, have these, really important conversations. And listen, the important conversations could be laughter, right? It doesn't have to be like deep all the time, but it is this time of reconnection with the self, right? Reconnection with your heart space, reconnection with your masculine and feminine energies, and maybe just like reflecting on how it's been going, But it's really important to understand these goddess energies. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or how you present, okay? They're here within us. This divine feminine energy has been rising, right? It's not going anywhere, and she's getting more prominent. And I do think it's really beautiful that, the sun and the moon are in that sescu square with Juno. Um, and Juno's consort was Jupiter, and Venus is still in this beautiful conversation with Jupiter, right? And that divine feminine. And she's just moved into Leo. You can see she's at 2 degrees of Leo. So she's now in that fixed fire energy. Um, who is the sun, right? So, and if you guys don't quite get everything, I hope you guys at least get the vibes that everything's working together to get us into this new alignment in order for us to move forward in a more succinct way, right? Get us out of those patriarchal norms and move us more back into a more succinct way of working together, understanding abundance, understanding, you know, life is secular, even if we are in our meat suits right now, but death isn't the ending. Um, being born again, all these things, and in any way you want to hear the way that being born again, whatever that brings to mind to you, right? But seeing that it is the infinity symbol, and it is important to reconnect all these stories about us being whole, us understanding how we are even more whole when we connect to the earth, when we connect to the stars, right? When we connect to the elements. We're not an island, you know. Our heroine and hero's journeys are all our journeys, and remembering that we are all in this together. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope you guys have a great dark moon. We've got some videos coming up because we got to do one about Venus and Leo. I still got to talk about Sedna and Uranus. And then the nodes are getting ready to move. What are the nodes moving? Or is Chiron? Yeah, Chiron's going to move into Taurus on the 19th. So lots of energies moving forward. Always use this dark moon energy to be quiet because it is such a strong time. The void is such a strong time, right? When you go into meditation or just realignment, that's when these powerful things come through. Oh, there was something else I was going to say about maybe June 19th. I don't remember. Okay. Oh, I know I was going to say, I just learned from Heather Insworth, who's one of my mentors. The moon, when we go into dark moon energy, the moon goes invisible when it's 13 degrees away from the sun, and then it's conjunct, and then it goes 13 degrees on the other side, and then when it gets that 14th, 15th, that's when we get into that new moon energy. And again, number 13, right? That is that divine feminine number, right? And it's when she said that, I was like, oh, perfect, right? So use this dark moon, you guys. Have these good conversations. See where maybe you can communicate differently with yourself. See where maybe your communications are holding you back, and it's time to change the affirmations or understand, this is a new time, this is a new beginning. Venus and Jupiter are starting a new 12-year cycle, right? So let's see where we are now, and see where we want to move to. We've got lots of support celestially running around this planet. So, okay, guys, I am going to leave it there. I will talk to you guys soon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.